All right, everybody. So this video is going to cover chapters 7 and 8 of your lecture. Oops. Please excuse me. It's the middle of the night, so we're going to work it out. All right. So your lecture notes has about 14 pages. The goal is to get through all of the pages in one session. If I'm not able to complete the notes or cover all of the pages in one video, then I will go ahead and create a part 2. All right, so starting with your first page. Number 1, ask, what is the skeletal system composed of? Well, the system itself is composed of bones, cartilage, joints, and ligaments. Again, number 1, the composition of the skeletal system is bones, cartilage, joints, and ligaments. Also know that the skeletal system itself makes up about 20% of your total body mass. For number 2, where it's asking for the 2 major parts or the divisions. On your screen, you have those 2 divisions. The first is the axial skeleton. It holds the skull, the vertebral column, thoracic cage. Both the hyoid and the ear ossicles or the ear openings are also referred to as portions of the skeletal system. The second division is the appendicular. So all of the extremities, your arms, your legs, and the girdles, both the arm girdles and your pelvic girdles are also included in the appendicular skeleton. Okay, so we're looking at number 3, more information on your axial skeleton. 80 bones is how many bones are made up or found within the axial skeleton. The 3 major regions of the axial skeleton is going to be the skull, the vertebral column, and the thoracic. All right, so looking at number 5. Number 5 is asking you of the skull, or the skull is formed by 2 sets of bones, and they are, first you have your cranial bones, and that's going to be your A under number 5. B is your facial bones, which would be the B again, as I stated. So for A, cranial bones, they are the bones that enclose and protect the brain in the cranial cavity. The cranium itself is divided into 2 parts, which is the superior and the inferior. The superior portion is referred to as the vault. The inferior portion is referred to as the base. So the calaveria, calaveria is the portion of the skull where it is bald, or the upper portion. And then your base, as we can see here, is separated into the 3 major bones that comprise the bottom portion of the brain. So here in the front, this is our anterior cranial fossa. This is also the location of the frontal bone. Here we have the ethmoid bone, which we will look at a little bit later time in our notes. Oops, I didn't know I could do that. All right, here in the center, which is our middle cranial fossa, is the sphenoid bone. And then this rear portion is going to be the posterior cranial fossa, which is the, posterior cranial fossa, which is the occipital bone. All right, moving on to number 6. Number 6 says all bones of the skull are firmly held together by interlocking joints called sutures. So the blank underneath number 6 is sutures. They have a sawtooth or serrated appearance. In infants, they are referred to as the fontanelle. For number 7, again, we are still looking at these cranial fossas. So it's just a repetition for the skull geography. So again, A is going to be the anterior cranial fossa. B is going to be the middle cranial fossa. And C will be the posterior cranial fossa. Going back to the previous slide, looking at number 8 is asking you to list the cranial bones, and then I've indicated a number 2 beside the bones that are paired. So going in order on the slide from frontal bone down, your A will be the frontal bone. You do have a pair of parietal bones, so that will be your B. C is occipital. D, which is paired as well, is going to be your temporal bone. And then finally, your E and F are the sphenoid and ethmoid bones. For number 9, it's asking you about the parietal bones and the major associated sutures. So this information has actually been pre-populated for you. It states what are the 4 sutures and their locations. So I've provided for you under number 9, numbered 1 through 4, excuse me, the sutures and a description of where you can locate them. So starting with the first suture, I apologize, new computer, very finicky. All right, so here we have our frontal bone. This green portion is our parietal bone. The suture that is located in between the frontal or the frontal bone and the parietal bones is referred to as the coronal suture. The sagittal suture, which is your number 2, actually runs in between the 2 parietal bones. So it's technically not visible on this particular slide, but just know that it runs, it's more like an intersection from the coronal suture all the way to the back where the lambdoid suture is located. So the lambdoid suture is your number 3. It is actually in between the parietal bones in the green and the occipital bone in the purple. And then finally, your 4th suture is the squamous suture, which is located between the green parietals and your temporal bones. So this line here is going to be your squamous. All right, moving on. For number 10, I'm actually asking you to provide me with a definition to a sutural bone. So that definition is tiny, irregularly shaped bones that appear within sutures. Again, tiny, irregularly shaped bones that appear within sutures. I don't see an example of a sutural bone on the slide that I have up in front of you, but as you go through your images within your lab manual or in your lecture textbook, and you're looking at sutures, you may see a little small irregularly shaped bone that is present. All right, so looking at your number 11, the facial bones is made up of a total of 14 bones. Some of the bones are paired, actually most of them are paired. So looking down here at your facial bones, again, it's already been populated for you. So I've indicated which of the bones have already received pairs and which ones have not. Since it's populated, we're going to skip over that portion. So the next item that it's asking you for in your notes is number 12. What is the only freely movable joint in the skull? That is going to be the temporomandibular joint. Correct. Temporomandibular joint. So the spelling is TEMPOROMAN, D like dog, IB like Bobby, ULAR. Temporomandibular joint. I apologize, temporomandibular joint. Number 12. All right, number 13. Blank the cone. Shaped orbits are bony cavities in which the eye are formally encased and is cushioned by fatty tissue. Your number 13 is going to be the orbit. 13 will be the orbit bone. And that's ORBIT. All right, next we are at number 14. There are 7 bones that make up the orbit, and it's asking you to list them. I do not believe that I have an image of the orbital bone that I can refer you to. So we do have it here. Okay, so I'm just going to use this image and just try to go through and identify the bones for you. All right, so again, we're looking at the bones of I apologize. What are the 7 bones that make up the orbits? Okay. They are the frontal bone, which is here. Your sphenoid, which is not visible technically. I want to say this portion here is going to be the sphenoid portion. Zygomatic bone, which has already been identified for us. Here's our maxilla. The palatine is actually this back portion back here, lacrimal. This would be our lacrimal bone. And the ethmoid. Now, I said this was the sphenoid. This portion back here may be more of the sphenoid bone, and then this would be the ethmoid, because it's actually more centrally located. When we went back to this portion up here is where your ethmoid bone is located, and then all of this is a portion of the sphenoid. So from looking at this diagram, I would say this is our lacrimal, this is our ethmoid, and then this is going to be a portion of the sphenoid. This is your frontal. This is all part of the maxilla. I want to say this back portion here is going to be the palatine, and then identified for us as the zygomatic. All right, for number 15, the nasal cavity is constructed of bone and hyaline cartilage. It is formed by four parts or by parts of four bones, and then it's asking you to list these bones. Now for you, you have the 1, 2, and 3 on page 3, and then your number 4 is actually going to appear on the next page. So in order, all right, so for the nasal cavity, the roof or the upper portion is actually going to be formed by the cribriform plates of the ethmoid, the lateral walls, which are largely shaped by the superior and middle concha of the ethmoid bone, and the perpendicular plates of the palatine bones. So your number 1 is the ethmoid. Number 2 is the palatine bone. Number 3 is maxilla or maxillary bone. And then your number 4 is the inferior nasal concha. All right, number 16. Blank composed of 5 skull bones, and the bones are listed. That is going to be your paranasal sinuses. The paranasal sinuses composed of 5 bones is what is where your paranasal sinuses will be located. So the bullets that follow are characteristics of the paranasal sinuses. You have the mucosa-lined sinuses that are also filled with air spaces. The air spaces help lighten up the weight of the skull. They enhance the resonance of the voice. The mucosa allows for warm, humid air to be there. And then the actual sinuses can be found in your frontal bones, the sphenoid, ethmoid, and maxillary bones. All right, number 17 is going to be the hyoid bone. So your hyoid bone is located anterior. Yeah, anterior to your cervical vertebrae. So you have your atlas and your axis, which are the first 2 vertebrae, and then the 5 that follow make up the bones of the neck. I want to say about between 3 and 4, C3, C4 is where you would find the hyoid bone. So here's your hyoid bone. So in 17, you're going to put hyoid in the blank. Please put a star beside or in some form or fashion identify these bullets. So the first bullet is a need to know that it is not a bone of the skull. It is actually not articulated with anything else in the body. Bullet number 2, that is one of the uniqueness of the hyoid bone, because it is the only bone in the body that does not articulate directly with any other bone. It does allow anchoring for the stylohyoid ligaments to the process and to the processes of the temporal bone, the stylo process to temporal bone. Your 4th bullet, it is the movable base of the tongue. And as we get into the muscular system, we will actually look into more details of the attachments and the functions of those muscles that are associated with your hyoid bone. All right, so 1 through 17 we completed would have been the first portion of chapter 7, I'm sorry, part A of chapter 7. So I'm moving on into the part B. Part B is a continuation of the axial skeleton. All right, so what is the function of the vertebral column? There are two primary functions. The first is that it surrounds and protects the spinal cord. We are looking at number 1 in part B. Again, that it surrounds and protects the spinal cord. The second function is that it transmits weight of the trunk to the lower limbs. Again, it transmits the weight of the trunk to the lower limbs. All right, looking at number 2 under part B, list the 5 major regions of the vertebrae and then the numbered bones associated with it. So I've already taken the time to kind of pre-populate that portion for you. So looking at number 2 under part B, your number 1 is cervical. There are 7 cervical vertebrae. They are numbered C1 through C2. So this section here in the neck is where you will find your cervical. The next section, starting here where your ribs are located, are going to be your thoracic. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae. They are identified as T1 through T12. Down here in this lower portion are your 5 lumbar. They are identified L1 through L5. In this lower portion here, you have your sacrum, which is a total of 5 fused bones. And then here, the extension is the coccyx, which is a total of 4 fused bones. So not provided in the slide. But number 3, what is the function of the vertebral column curvatures? The function of the curvatures is to increase the resilience and flexibility of the spine. Again, it is to increase the resilience, RESILIENCE, and flexibility of the spine. And I made a note for you that the vertebrae is a flexible, curved structure containing 26 irregular bones in 5 major regions, which is what we just went through. All right, looking at number 4, what are the curvatures of the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral bones? So the cervical and the lumbar have the same curvature. The thoracic and the sacral have the same curvature. So if you're looking at the vertebrae here, this is our cervical, and down at the bottom portion is our lumbar. So the cervical and the lumbar curvatures have a concave curve posteriorly. Your thoracic and your sacral have a convex curve posteriorly. All right, moving on to our abnormal curvatures. Ooh, excuse me. All right, it does provide you with normal curvatures being lordic and kyphotic. But we're going to look at the abnormal curvatures based on what I have on your paper. Let me turn to the page. All right, so I've pre-populated information about the abnormal curvatures and the conditions that are associated with it. So your first is going to be scoliosis. The image in the diagram is actually a example of the scoliosis, because here you have your vertebral column, and that you see that you have a lateral curve inward or toward the lateral side of the body, which is the abnormal curve. This is your scoliosis. Kyphosis is going to be the second bullet, referred to as the hunchback. It is an exaggerated thoracic curvature. And then your C is going to be lordus. It is an accentuated lumbar curvature. Lordus is actually visible in pregnant women. You will actually see that they have more of a curve in their lower lumbar region to support the weight of the child that they are carrying. All right, so number 6. Let me sit up. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Number 6. What are the major supporting ligaments of the vertebral column? They are the anterior and posterior longitudinal ligaments. Again, the posterior and anterior longitudinal ligaments. All right, so we are at number 7. What ligament connects adjacent vertebrae and they contain elastic connective tissue? That is going to be the ligamentum flavum. So let me spell that. That is Ligamentum. So ligamentum. Flavum is Flavum. Your number 8. What is the function of the short ligaments? So the short ligaments actually connect each vertebrae. They're going to be located on the sides of the vertebrae, and they connect them both below and above. So they are more of a supporting type of ligament provided to the vertebrae. Excuse me, you're going to get a lot of yarning because it's like 1 o'clock. All right. Number 9, what is the major function of the intervertebral disc or intervertebral disc? Major function is that it absorbs shock. Its major function is that it absorbs shock. Excuse me. I'm very sorry. Hope I'm not making you yarn. So let me peek at my time. It's not giving me a time. It might be a good thing. All right. All right, so we are at number 10. The intervertebral disc are cushion-like pads composed of 2 parts. List these parts and their functions. So the 2 parts, as listed here, is going to be the annulus fibrosus. The annulus fibrosus is the center portion of the vertebrae located at the body's location. If you think about a stress ball, the way that it can compress and then recoil, that is how the gelatinous annulus fibrosus is, fatigue. And I'm saying that backwards. The annulus fibrosus is the wrapping. Nucleus pulposus is the stress ball. Excuse me, hang in here with me, y'all. I'm sorry. I was determined we're gonna get it done tonight. So disregard what I just said. We're gonna scratch that. We're gonna start over. Going back to number 10, we're looking at the 2 portions. First, let's look at the nucleus pulposus. The nucleus pulposus, again, is the gelatinous nucleus that acts like a stress ball. It gives elasticity and compressibility to the vertebral disc. Again, it is the inner gelatinous nucleus, which is this dark portion. It acts like a stress ball with its compressibility and elasticity. Annulus fibrous, which is the portion around it, acts like a ring of fibers or an outer collar. It's composed of collagen and fibrocartilage. It actually protects the spine when it is compressed. So it allows for it to have twisting forces and tension toward the spine is the support of that. Any sudden or severe physical trauma to the spine, such as bending forward while lifting something heavy, can result in a herniation of one or more of the disc. All right, so here we have our vertebrae. Excuse me. This back portion is where the vertebral body is located, which is what it's pointing to here. This is one of your spinous processes, and this may be a portion where your fascias are located, or your interior or the superior articular processes. All right, so moving on. Number 11, what is meant by the term herniated disc or prolapsed? So in the event that there is a rupture of the annulus fibrous, that was the one I said opposite. So the annulus fibrous is like the wrapping or the protection of the nucleus propulsus. If it ruptures, what usually will happen is that you will have a protrusion of the nucleus propulsus, which is a type of spongy nucleus. Remember I said it's gelatin. So it will start to protrude through. I don't believe we do not have an image of a herniated disc. Excuse me. All right, moving on. We are at number 12, the general structure of the vertebrae. Again, not all vertebrae possess a body, a spine, or transverse foramina. So we are looking at general structures of the vertebrae. So there are 7 total, but I broke them up in 12 and 13. Looking at your number 12 on page 4, the first item is going to be the spinous process. So we're looking at the atlas and axis. So I'm going to go here to the cervical section. This portion that is sticking out is going to be your spinous process. It projects posteriorly. So this is the posterior portion of the vertebrae. And then we have our C1, C2, and the remaining cervical vertebrae have been identified. This nose-like piece is what we refer to as your spinous process. Transverse processes are going to be posterior and laterally. So here, this portion that sticks out from either side, this is going to be your transverse process. Specifically on the cervical, these are your transverse foramen, which are the openings, and these are only visible on your cervical vertebrae. So this is also a identifying characteristic of them. The superior articular processes. Let me check. This is our thoracic. So you would hear me refer to them as facets. It is the same structure, just being provided with a different name. So the superior articular processes are going to be these portions up at the top, which are also located here. And then at the bottom are going to be your inferior articular processes. All right. How many bones are in the cervical vertebrae? We are moving on to page 5. And your answer is 7. Going back, just cervical. So we have 7 cervical vertebrae. They are the smallest and the lightest vertebrae within the vertebral column. There are the first 2 are have different identifying characteristics. So for example, our C1 is our atlas. The C1 does not have a body. It does have our transverse foramen, which is located here, which we spoke about. And then it has a posterior arc, an anterior arc. This is actually the front portion of the vertebrae. And then you have your superior articular surface and your lateral mass, which is this portion here. The dens is where it articulates on the axis, which is our C2. And then it shows you here where they are located. I apologize. So the dens is definitely a identifying characteristics of your C2. It is also referred to as the odontoid process. So instead of a body, which neither of them have, it's more of a structure that protrudes in order for the C1 to nod your head yes and shake your head left to right to say no, or just to go side to side. All righty. We are at cervical vertebrae number 14. Okay. All right, so number 14 specifically talks about the atlas and the axis. So in your first blank, you should write atlas, ATLAS, also put C1, and then the bullets that follow are characteristics of the atlas, that it has no body or spinous process, that it consists of an anterior and posterior arches, which we looked at momentarily, and then 2 lateral masses, which allows it to articulate and move our head, on the C2, which is the axis. Looking at the second blank, that is where you're going to put your axis, also C2. Again, it has the dens that projects superiorly in the anterior arcs of the atlas. So again, C1 does not have a body. It allows for the head movement no. Number 15, C1 allows you to nod your head yes. C2 allows your head to nod for no. Look at number 15 on the next page. The question is, how many vertebrae are in the thoracic region? There are 12. They are identified on the blank as T1 through T12, and they increase in size from the first to the last. Again, some characteristics have been listed for you, that they have a long spinous process that points inferiorly or towards the back. They have a circular vertebrae foramina, and their articular facets allows for their rotation in the area of the spine. Excuse me, number 18. Which region of the vertebral column receives the most stress by bearing the most weight of the body? That is going to be your lumbar region. It is the lower portion of the vertebral column, so it is the section that receives the most stress. For your number 19, how many vertebrae are in the lumbar region? There are 5 in the lumbar region. And please also write that they are identified as L1 through L5. Again, the bullets that follow give you characteristics. That is short, thick pedicles, and the lamellae, which are not really identified here on the slide. So you would refer to your book to get more details on how that portion is identified. Moving on to number 20 is asking about what bone has a triangular appearance and helps to shape the posterior wall of the pelvis. That is going to be the sacrum. Again, the sacrum is 5 fused bones identified as S1 through S5. 21. Oh, we just did 21. It was the sacrum. No, I did 20. My apologies. I did 20. 21, what is the triangular shaped bone that is referred to as the tailbone? That is going to be the coccyx, COCCY, which I do not, yep, it is identified. Okay, so that is COCCY is going to be your 21. 22, what makes up the composition of the thoracic cavity? All right, so the thoracic cavity is composed of thoracic vertebrae posteriorly, the sternum, costal cartilages anteriorly, and the ribs laterally. So going back to your 22, you have 3 bullets. So your bullet 1 is the thoracic vertebrae posteriorly. Second bullet is the sternum and the costal cartilages. So that's COSTAL. This is the costal cartilage, which is numbered 1 through 10. And then the ribs laterally. So this cartilage is what articulates here with the sternum and with the ribs. In this slide, it does identify where the true ribs are located, which is at the first 7. Your false ribs are going to be your 8 through 12, and then the floating ribs, which aren't really visible here, are be the ones that do not articulate with any structure at all. Those are going to be your floating ribs. All right, 23, list the functions of the thoracic cavity. Your first bullet is that it protects vital organs of the thoracic cavity. Second bullet is that it supports shoulder girdles and upper limbs. Your third bullet is going to be that it provides an attachment site for muscles of the neck, back, chest, and shoulders. All right, 24. The sternum, also referred to as the breastbone, has 3 fused bones and is asking us to identify them. All right, so our 3 fused bones are going to be the manubrium, which is the superior portion identified on your slide. The middle portion or the mid portion is going to be referred to as the body, which is the larger section. And then at the very, very tip, we have the xiphoid process, which is referred to as the inferior end. So beside each, I did provide some type of description to give you a little bit of information about each. So again, each one of the bullets as outlined on your slide. Bullet 1 is the manubrium. The middle portion is the body, and then the xiphoid process. The sternal angle is actually a suture, or where the joint of the manubrium and the body of the sternum have fused together. All right, number 25, what are the anatomical landmarks of the sternum? Okay, so at the top, first we have our jugular notch, which is this little curvature at the very top of the sternum. That is your first blank. Second blank is going to be the sternal angle, which I just recently mentioned. The sternal angle is the ridge that is across the front of the sternum, which is where this suture-like structure is located. And then finally is the xiphisternal joint, which is the point where the sternal body and the xiphoid process move. So that is the sternal body here. And it's not really clear to see here, but there's also a line indicating a fused portion. So the xiphoid process and the sternal body has fused. Okay. Whew. We're in the home stretch. All right, we are at ribs and their attachments on page 8. There are 12 pairs of ribs, all attached posteriorly to the body and the transverse processes of the thoracic vertebrae. Costal cartilage joins most of the ribs. So how many pairs? And as we just went through on the previous slide, your First blank is going to be the true ribs, which is pairs 1 through 7. Your second blank is going to be false ribs, which is pairs 8 through 12. And then your third blank will be floating ribs, where there's no attachment to the sternum. All right, at the bottom, what are the main parts of rib structures? So let's see if we got an individual rib. We got a rib. All right, looking at our image on the screen, the main parts, first you have the head, which is identified toward the center portion of the slide here. So your first blank, the posterior end, which is the portion that is, I want to say that's the part posterior. That is the portion that is articulating with the ribs. I'm sorry, with the vertebrae. Yes, there's the part of the rib that articulates with the vertebrae. All right, so you have your head. Next blank is going to be the neck, which is identified in your slide. And then you have your tubercle, which is lateral to the neck. And then finally the shaft. Trying to speed up a little bit. I think I'm running out of time. All right, on page 9, we are actually getting to begin chapter 8 when we are talking about the appendicular skeletal system. Ooh. Excuse me. All right. Looking at page 9, question 1, what is the composition of the appendicular skeleton? So the appendicular skeleton is composed of the bones of the limbs and their girdles. There are 2 girdles located within the body. Your A is going to be your pectoral girdle, which attaches to the upper limbs, attaches the upper limbs to the body's trunk. The B is going to be the pelvic girdle, which attaches the lower limbs to the body trunk. Again, for your first blank, underneath, what is the composition? It is the bones of limbs and their girdles. Number 2, what bones comprise the pectoral girdle, also referred to as the shoulder girdle? Either term would be acceptable. For number 2, you will write the clavicles and the scapulae. The clavicle and the scapulae, which are listed here where it has upper extremities. Number 3, what bone anchors muscles and articulates with the flattened acromial end of the scapula? That is going to be the clavicle, also referred to as the collarbone, which is here. All right, so again, the sternal end, excuse me. All right, so I've provided characteristics of the bone for you as well. Number 4, where will you find the scapulae or shoulder blades located within the body? They're going to be on the dorsal surface, which is the back of the ribs. They're going to be located between ribs 2 through 7. Number 4 is going to be on the dorsal surface of the ribs between ribs 2 and 7. Moving on to number 5, the upper limb. Blank bones form the skeletal framework of the upper limb. That's going to be 30. There's 30 bones that comprise the upper framework. Your number 6 is going to be list the bones of the upper limb. So your A is arm. B is going to be the forearm. C will be the radius and the ulna. So again, A is the arm, B is the forearm, and C is going to be the radius and the ulna. There are 8 carpal bones in the wrist. 5 metacarpals and 14 phalanges in the fingers. Number 7, what is the largest bone in the upper limb? That is your humerus. The largest bone in the upper limb is the humerus. It articulates superiorly with the glenoid cavity of the scapula, which is here. Excuse me. All right, number 8. What are the 2 bones of the forearm? Your A is ulna. Your B is radius. Again, characteristics of each have been provided. Number 9, what bones comprise the hand and the wrist? The hand is the carpus, metacarpus, and the phalanges. So your A is going to be carpus, C-A-R-P-U-S. Do we have a diagram? We do. Where am I? B, blah. Before I move on to B, let's go back and look at A, where we have the carpus. This is a diagram that I was actually trying to locate for those of you who have the lab exam. So when you look at both your hands and your feet, you want to make sure that you pay attention to how many sections you have in your phalanges. So your phalanges are actually your fingers. All of the fingers, with the exception of the thumb, have a distal, a middle, and a proximal. The thumb only has a distal and a proximal bone. And then all of this portion, which is your palm, is going to be your metacarpals. When identifying them, always start with the thumb being the first bone, and then you would count over. So let's say that Donna put a pin in this particular bone. We would count this as 1, 2, 3, 4. We are in the proximal section. So it is the 4th proximal phalanges because it's in that section. Or you could say proximal phalanges number 4. You have to indicate which digit is being referred to. Make sure that you're identifying the section that has been asked to be identified. And then again, the carpals are in the wrist. So now moving on to B. B will be referred to as your metacarpus. And your C is going to be the phalanges. And then some of the items that I mentioned briefly about the pollex or the thumb having 2 bones, no middle phalanx. So it does not have the middle portion, it only has the distal and the proximal. Is also mentioned in or already populated for you. All right, moving on to the next page. On page 11, what bone comprises the pelvic girdle? The pelvic girdle is 2 hip bones or 2 coaxal bones, C-O-X-A-L. 2 hip bones or 2 coaxal bones. Excuse me. All right, number 12 on page 11. List the 3 regions of the hip bone. So looking at the image on the screen, the color-coded sections is going to identify your 3 regions. So your A is going to be the ilium, the largest portion of the coaxal bone or the hip bone is going to be the ilium. It is the superior region of the coaxal bone. It is where the sarcoiliac joint is located. So in the center where you would have, which is located here where you would have the sacrum bone, and then this would be the ilium part of the coaxal bone. This line in between is where you would find your sarcoiliac joint. That is a question that is potentially going to be asked on your lab midterm. The second region is going to be the ischium. So this pink portion is going to be the ischium, and then your C is going to be the pubis, which is the purple portion. Again, characteristics of each have been pre-populated for you. All right, on number 13, list the characteristics of the male and female pelvis. Okay. Your A, which is what is the blank. We're speaking of the female pelvis. The main thing you need to know is that it is adapted for childbirth. That is what is missing from A. It is adapted for childbirth. It is considered a true pelvis because it has an inferior brim or pelvic brim that defines the birth canal. Male pelvis, D, is going to be that it's tilted less forward. Again, D is that it is tilted less forward. So the extreme tilt that you would see in a female pelvis is because it is adapted for childbirth, whereas in a man's pelvis or male pelvis, it does not have the greatest, the tilt is not as extreme. Number 14, what role does the lower limb play in the body? For your blank A, it is that it carries the entire weight of the erect body. Again, that it carries the entire weight of the erect body. Number 15, what bones make up the thigh? So in your first blank, you will list that it is the femur. The femur. Please put a star beside that is the longest and strongest bone in the body. Number 15 is femur. Put a star beside number A, the largest and strongest bone in the body. Your second blank is going to be the patella. P-A-T-E-L-L-A. P-A-T-E-L-L-A. Patella. All right, number 16. What are the bones of the leg? On page 13, in your first blank, the first bone of the leg is going to be the tibia. It is going to be the medial leg bone. It's what receives weight from the body and from the femur, the body of the femur, and transmits that weight towards the foot. Your B is going to be the fibula, which I believe was on the previous slide. Yes. 17. What are the bones? What are the bone divisions of the foot? So we're going to go through this a little more quickly. A is tarsus, T-A-R-S-U-S. Your B is the metatarsus. And your C are, again, the phalanges. So in your hand, they refer to as the carpus. In the feet, they are the tarsus. Number 18, how are the arcs of the foot maintained? They are maintained by interlocking foot bones, ligaments, and tendons. Again, 18B is that it is maintained by interlocking foot bones, ligaments, and tendons. Page 14. We are at the end. All right, so all other information has been populated for you. If you look at number 19 on page 14, skull bones connected by blah, blah, blah. I'm looking because I'm not sure what I wanted you to have ossified. Oh, so this has to be fontanelles. There are 4 fontanelles, skull bones. Huh. Fontanelles. Okay, so 19 is going to be fontanelles. That is Fontanelles. Skull bones connected by fontanelles. These are the unossified sutures located within infants. So your 19 is going to be fontanelles. And yes, we are at the end. I apologize that I went rather quickly. The goal was to get to it so that you all had a means to fill in the blanks and then use this as a point of reference. It's not the best PowerPoint, but it does have details in here that I think you will find helpful as you prepare for your lab exam on Thursday. And then as we go through the overview next Tuesday for your upcoming exam, hopefully this will be a beneficial tool for you as well. All right, guys, I hope you have a fabulous evening.